Very good afternoon, Lakshman.
Good afternoon, sir.
Sunil, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Okay, Darshan, start.
Okay, sir. Today's my topic is Entero-cutaneous fistula. My name is Dr. Darshan Verma, second year surgical resident in Tuesday Surgical Unit under Dr. G.H.R. sir.
What happened?
Hello, sir. The
Yeah.
network.
Okay.
Some network.
Okay.
Gunanda is driving, I think.
Yes, sir.
મારે
ગાડીમાં બેઠા છે.
પંકજભાઈ અત્યારે હું છે ને પેલી એથિક્સ ની મીટિંગ માંથી નીકળ્યો
અચ્છા, ઓકે,
અને
ઓકે.
ઘેર પહોંચવું જરૂરી છે એટલે હું ડ્રાઇવિંગ કરું છું. નો પ્રોબ્લેમ, યુ કન્ટિન્યુ.
Okay, will not disturb you. Okay, Darshan start.
એથિક્સ ની મીટિંગ છે ને 2 કલાક ચાલી.
Okay, no problem. Okay.
Fistula is an abnormal communication between the two epithelialized surface. In this case, entero-cutaneous fistula, which is the connection between the intestinal lumen and the skin surface. The mortality associated with the GI fistula has decreased from 40 to 60% in the past to the recent 15 to 20% of to the patients. This improvement in the prognosis is mainly attributed to the advances in the fluid and electrolyte and acid-based knowledge and therapy with blood administration, critical care, antibiotics regimen, and mainly due to the nutritional management. Gastric and duodenal fistulas. The main causes fistulas main causes are the iatrogenic causes in the 75% of the cases. The first is the surgical causes, which can occur into the any surgical procedures occurring on the gastric resection and in the laparoscopic fundoplication or endoscopic procedures like the ERCP, which may cause the duodenal perforation, and percutaneous endoscopic gastrostomy, which may lead to the gastrocutaneous fistula. Inflammatory causes are the Crohn's disease and the neoplastic causes, which may lead to gastrocutaneous, gastrocolic, or duodenocolic fistula. The small bowel fistula, main cause, the etiology are divided into the 5 parts. Congenital, which will be the persistence of the vitellointestinal duct, which will lead to the fecal discharge from the umbilicus region, and the trauma. Second is trauma, which may be due to the persistent open abdomen, which will lead to the desiccation of the small bowel loops open due to long time, or which may be due to the blunt or penetrating trauma to the abdomen. And the third one is the infections, mainly the tuberculosis. Another infections are amoebiasis and coccidiomycosis. Actinomycosis may rarely cause the intestinal fistula in case of the post-appendicectomy. Fourth causes are the perforation or injury with abscess. These are the mainly caused by the any perforation repair in the emergency surgeries, which may lead to the postoperative in the postoperative course may lead to the anastomotic leakage or formation of the localized abscess, which on draining may lead later into the gastrointestinal fistula. The fifth causes are the inflammation, irradiation, and tumor. In case of irradiation and tumor and inflammation like Crohn's disease, spontaneous fistula occur, which are the secondary fistula. Rate of this kind of fistula is around 20 to 25%. Colonic fistula. These are the main causes are the post-operative causes, followed by the Crohn's disease, diverticulitis, irradiation, and neoplasm. Staging and classification, which can be based on the anatomic character, which may be fistula may be internal between the two bowel gastrointestinal bowel loops, like gastrocolic, jejunocolic fistula, or fistula may be external, which may be the gastrointestinal tract to the skin, which are the entero-cutaneous fistulas. Based on the adjacent structures, the fistula may be divided into the adjacent structure like gastrocolic, jejuncolic fistula, etc. Based on the output, the fistula are divided into low output fistula, moderate output fistula, and high output fistula. In low output fistula, the output is less than 200 ml per day, and moderate output fistula output is 200 to 500 ml per day, and high output fistula output is more than 500 per day. Based on the etiology, these are divided into the spontaneous or iatrogenic fistula. In main cause of fistula is iatrogenic fistula, which is 75 up to 75%. Spontaneous fistula, which occurs due to the secondary to the Crohn's disease, diverticulitis, neoplasm, or irradiation, which is around 25%. According to fistula anatomy, the fistula may be divided, enterocutaneous fistula may be divided into the simple fistula, having the simple fistula tract opening into the skin of the abdomen from the leaked anastomotic site or adjacent bowel loop, or which may be it may be a complex enterocutaneous fistula where the wall of the anastomotic bowel segment have been disrupted, and there is formation of a collection or an abscess, which in turn is opening into the skin surface. Or there may be a multiple fistula opening into the single cavity, which in turn opens into the skin of the abdomen. The complication.
Darshan, go back one slide.
Yes, sir.
Is there any other type of fistula apart from this? Suppose you have done ileostomy, will you call it fistula or not?
Yes, sir.
So which type of fistula it will be? It can occur spontaneously, or you can make it iatrogenic. It's a controlled fistula you can do. So apart from these three, is there any other way there can be a presentation of fistula? And which usually never heals. Output may be small, may be large.
Due to secondary or spontaneous fistula like Crohn's fistula.
And that is a different, but the point is you have said there is a simple tract, there is an intervening abscess or multiplicity. Apart from that, there can be a fistula where the bowel stuck to the skin directly without any
to the anterior abdominal wall, bowel wall is stuck and there opening occurs.
So what happens in that kind of fistula? What is different from other types?
Usually the wound is open, like generally open abdomen.
So you can call it a variety of controlled fistula, but the problem is here the epithelialization of the fistula has occurred because there is a mucocutaneous has become one. So those fistula are most unlikely to heal. You understand?
Yes.
All these fistula you may not see the bowel, but in those fistula you will straight away see the bowel. It's like what we do in ileostomy. That's the kind of fistula which can be spontaneous, which can be iatrogenic. Most of the time they are post-operatively, and the bowel loop comes and become adherent with the wound, and there is epithelialization. The skin epithelium and mucosa merges as a one, and that fistula will not heal. We'll come to that when it is
decision making.
So that's the decision making that somebody, Prujal has written in knowledge, atmospheric fistula. That is a variety of fistula according to the presentation. Okay.
Complication of the fistula, mainly the fluid and electrolyte imbalance. Patient may be in severe shock and electrolyte imbalance, which may be due to the anatomical location of fistula, which may lead to like in the gastric fistula there is a hypokalemic hypochloremic metabolic alkalosis, and in the colonic fistula there may be the more loss of the potassium and more loss of fluid. And in case of terminal ileal fistula, there is a potassium loss and fluid loss. In case of the proximal jejunal fistula, there is more loss of the bicarbonate and along with fluid. The fistula and secondly leads to the malnutrition into the patient due to the discontinuity of the bowel absorption capacity alters, and the normal nutrition need cannot be met. And fourth complication is sepsis, which may be due to the local wound sepsis, and which there may be a intra-abdominal collection or intra-abdominal sepsis, which may be diffuse, leading to the peritonitis in the abdomen. There is a abdominal wall and wound complication. The fistula output, especially from the proximal fistula, will lead to the irritation of the skin surrounding the fistula, may lead to the abdominal wall cellulitis. Management of the entero-cutaneous fistula is divided into the.
Just a minute. Yes. Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, sir. Hello.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Very well. Very
Okay.
well.
So he described about the gastric fistula, jejunal, ileal, colonic. What about the
Yes, sir.
duodenal fistulas? What is the physiological difference between gastric or small bowel fistula than duodenal fistula?
Darshan, are you hearing?
Yes, sir. In duodenal fistula, more loss of the bicarbonate occurs, and the sodium loss is isotonic, and more potassium loss is also isotonic, and fluid and more loss of the bicarbonate occurs.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to add anything?
Yes, it is more of the electrolyte management that is more important.
Yes. Right? You should say more. The problem with your, go back one slide. So you have taken complication as a one. It is not like that. It will vary fistula by fistula. You cannot generalize it, because all fistula will not have this all complication. Lakshman wants to say there will be a different group of complication when there is a gastric or duodenal fistula, and there will be different group of complication when there is a terminal ileal fistula. Do you understand?
Yes.
There will be different group when there is a low output fistula, moderate, and high output. This is generalization. What do you mean by when will be sepsis with fistula?
In case of the post-operative causes, anastomotic leak, there may be a collection forming the intra-abdominal abscess.
So, okay, before that, let me ask you, what is the mechanism or the reason for formation of fistula? Have you taken that? Why fistula occur? Forget about all these causes. That is undergraduate causes. You are telling me 1, 2, 3, 4. I am not concerned with that. Everybody knows that causes. Why fistula develops? Tell me the reasons for development of fistula. These are the causes. I want actually why there is some patients develop fistula, some do not. Why so? Anastomosis is the cause, but all anastomosis develops fistula. Malignancy is the cause. All malignancy develops fistula. So what is the actual reason why fistula develops?
In case of post-operative patient, mainly develops the anastomotic leak, which may leads to the collection. And,
No. Yes, sir. Continue.
It is not like that. That you are saying simply the reason. Even if there is a leak, it does not mean it will develop into fistula. Lakshman, what do you say?
Yeah. Etiology is altogether different and predisposing factors are different.
Exactly.
So we know the etiology. That is why we are treating. But what are the predisposing factors about that fistula formation which we can prevent or minimize?
Exactly. The reasons are totally different than what you have described. Those etiology remain same. Do you understand? In one patient, you perform a hemicolectomy. In a 10 patients, 6 may not develop fistula. Of the same etiology, patient is supposedly having a malignancy. 6 patient does not develop fistula. 4 patient develop fistula. Why? Cause is malignancy or surgery or anastomosis, whatever you say. Yes.
Old age patient may be having in case of malignancy, pre-operative irradiation.
No. I am just explaining one cause. Sir is asking predisposing factor. Do you understand? Radiotherapy is one of the rare cause. It does
right.
not. How many patients of the right side malignancy will have a preoperative radiotherapy? None. Causes, do you understand? Day in, day out, those are the causes. There are preoperative causes, there are peroperative causes, and there are postoperative causes. That's what
Perfect.
Preoperative patient, old age of the patient, nutrition status of the patient.
So preoperative also there are modifiable causes and non-modifiable causes.
Yes.
Lakshman, please switch on your video. Lakshman?
Yes. Yes, now he has.
Yeah.
Okay. So you just tell him, because he's not getting my point. I think so.
So the modifiable causes means if patient is having malnutrition, suppose, so you can modify it. Low anemia is there, then you can correct the hemoglobin. But age you cannot modify.
You understand that there are some causes which you can anticipate and cure and treat the patient better way, which is you can call modifiable or preventable.
So you can optimize the patient, yeah.
Yes. So what are those causes? Preoperative, age, yes, right. Malnutrition, agreed, maybe modifiable. Anemia, what other causes? One important cause is planned surgery or emergency surgery. Do you understand? How does it change it?
In emergency surgery, usually there is presence of peritonitis, which is which
Is
leads
it
to
always peritonitis? Can be obstruction also.
dear.
Do you understand? Sir, it is not necessarily has to be a peritonitis. So causes. Suppose you have operated a case of enteric perforation and you have operated a case of peptic perforation. What is different in a fistula formation?
Okay.
I mean, have you got a video or not? Prerna, then you are listening. Have you got a video? Can you on your video?
Yeah, I can see, ma'am.
But I don't see her actually. She is my registrar. I was his first year resident, so I want my first year to see her. She was my registrar. She is in UK. She has joined from UK. Okay. So what is the difference?
So bowel content of the lumen is different.
No. You are not getting disease. Pathology will also cause which patient will develop fistula and which patient may not develop fistula. A patient having enteric perforation is very likely to develop fistula if primarily closed. So what you do in those cases, we go for now a stoma, but that is also one of the cause for disease itself, or which disease you are doing it. Do you understand? One more point is patient is on any immunosuppression drug or having some associated disease which is causing immunosuppression or the lower the immunity. A patient is having a kidney disease, uremic patient. Those are the patients preoperatively, they are more likely to develop the. Yes. Lakshman, you would like to add anything?
That's perfect. We can.
Okay. And peroperative causes.
Operatively, there may be any inadvertent injury, missed enterotomies.
No. The problem is you are going to appear in exam. If you say inadvertent injury as a first cause, you are going. At least I will not hear anything further. you are harming surgeon's ego first. So that is you should always go. I'm not laughing matter. Go for common causes.
Common causes, yes.
Inadvertent injury is not a common cause.
Missed.
No, bowel ischemia.
Vascularity is important, huh?
Exactly.
When you are resecting.
So the problem is vascularity, edema, status of bowel, hyperemia is there, disease process is there. There you can see presence of peritonitis and poor presence of sepsis. Do you understand? So those are the things which decide. Even if you have an inadvertent injury, it doesn't mean that patient will develop fistula. One more point is whether it is a small bowel disease, large bowel disease. Accordingly, also patient will have chances of development of fistula.
Inadvertent injuries generally heal very well if you do not miss them.
Yes, it is a missing the injury which is a problem, right? Similarly, the associated handling of pancreas may have been required. There may be assault to biliary tree. Those are the cases where perioperatively chances of fistula formation are higher. But the most important is the vascularity. That is
Anasmotic tension. These are the two important factors.
So that is nothing to do with the disease. It is not even technique. The some bowel is good, some is not good. If edema is too much, vascularity is hampered. Whatever good sutures you take, chances of fistula is very high. What other causes? Perioperative. Distal obstruction. Never forget to tackle that. You have done a very good anastomosis, but you have missed the pathology or something different. So it can be a perioperative cause as well as I think Gunwan is saying.
Is it Dr. Khiria?
Yes, sir.
ये
I'm here.
ऑडियो आपका है सर? ओके ओके फाइन.
गुणवंत भाई नो છે ગાડી નો
अच्छा ओके.
Okay. What else? Why there can be a distal obstruction will cause fistula?
Darshan.
Yeah, more chances of anastomotic leakage in case of distal obstruction.
You should say back pressure is that. So any stasis. This will also call, when you will discuss non-healing of fistula. This will also be cause of it. One more cause for operative is inadequate tackling of the disease. A patient is having a disease and you have not, free margin is not achieved. Particularly suppose there is a stomach. There are chances that it will lead to fistula. I think Gunwan Bhai has reached home.
Yes.
Yes. So please. Okay, post-operative. Would you like to add anything for operative reason? So do you understand that we are not talking of which disease, as Lakshman has clearly said, nothing to do with the etiology. They are same for all cases. Do you understand? Would you like to add anything, Lakshman, for this?
Sir, perfect.
Okay, post-operative. What can be the post-operative which can lead to fistula? And never say inadvertent injury as a first cause. Huh? No surgeon will like that.
You should never include that causative factors.
Yes.
So many other important things are there, like ischemia and pathology.
We have discussed post-operative now. What can lead to development of fistula post-operative?
Persistent ileus present.
Is it a cause of fistula or developing fistula will cause ileus?
Developing fistula will cause ileus.
So ileus is unlikely to cause it. What else?
It is rather an effect, not the cause.
Other things, post-operative reason that the patient may develop fistula. It is a day-to-day practice. Which are the patients which likely to develop fistula? The common is, one is the electrolyte imbalance, persistence of malnutrition, bleeding, which can occur post-operatively, and again, blood pressure, which is low, leading to vascularity, which is not proper. Cause may be variable, particularly bleeding and relative ischemia at the site. Please continue.
Even a small hematoma at the anastomotic site can disrupt your anastomosis, however good it may be.
Right, Darshan?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
Management of the AC fistula. The 5 phases of the management are there. First is the stabilization within the 24 to 48 hours.
Again, Darshan, 1 minute. See, the thing is, the first important thing about treatment of fistula is whether it is an acute fistula or a chronic fistula. We have got n number of patients moving around with a chronic fistula for 2 years, 3 years without any issue. A small 5 ml, 10 ml rent is not going to make, 10 ml output is not going to make any difference, but it is still a fistula. Right? So, entero-cutaneous fistula, the treatment depends upon the acuteness of the fistula. If it's an acute fistula, it's a high output fistula, low output fistula, what type of fistula, and then depends whether you need special stabilization or not. Right? Okay, go ahead.
Yes, sir. After the stabilization, the second is the investigation. Which,
What do you mean by
But
stabilization?
how do you stabilize? How
What
do
do
you
you mean?
stabilize here?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Sunil Honklas is only for that particular purpose. Why? See,
Yes, sir.
you are
I
not
have
going to
explained.
go in immediately.
I have explained.
Yes. Yes,
And
okay,
sir,
fine.
Khali,
Go.
excuse me, he has just enumerated those 5 phases. Then he is going in details of each phase now.
Okay, sorry. Sorry.
I think
Go ahead.
let him
Uh,
finish with the
Yes, sir.
plan of management,
Okay.
and then
Right, sir. Okay, Darshan, go ahead.
Stabilization. There are the four phases. First one is the resuscitation. Second is nutrition. Third is control of sepsis, and fourth is the fistula drainage and skin care. The resuscitation of the patient. In the resuscitation, the goal is to restore the normal blood flow and which electrolyte correction and acid-base balance. The normal blood flow is restored by the isotonic fluids. Usually, the crystalloids are administered until the patient becomes euvolumic. The goal is to maintain the urine output more than the 0.5 ml per kg per hour. And the monitoring of the patient are done with the input output charting, CVP monitoring, and the patient. Since anemia and hypoalbuminemia correction is done along with this, because in patients having the hypoalbuminemia, there will be the more chances of edema, and the resuscitation will lead to the more edema due to the reduced capillary oncotic pressure in patients with the hypoalbuminemia. The electrolyte imbalance is mainly the calcium, magnesium, potassium, and phosphorus need to be monitored, because these are the intracellular ions, and the measurement, serum measurement of this will lead to the false sense of value that replenishment could not be done properly.
Darshan, I would like to ask one thing. Go back one slide. Last slide. Yeah. Calcium, potassium, sodium chloride, I understand. Magnesium, I doubt. Sir, what do you say? Because magnesium is a trace element. I mean, if I am not wrong, you don't need to look at it for the first 10 days or so.
Yeah.
Darshan, you can answer first, Darshan, if you have any idea.
So in case of
Darshan, in your practice as a 2-year, second-year resident, how many patients you have got your magnesium done?
one patient, 2 patients.
One patient. Right? We routinely get, so that's why I'm asking. Tell me.
So there will be hyperaldosteronism due to the fluid correction and hyponatremia, which will in turn lead to the hypokalemia and hypomagnesemia.
But what I am talking is that routinely, if you have to look at the magnesium, see, this is the acute phase. You are talking about restoration and resuscitation for the first 48 hours.
Yes.
I don't think you need to look at the magnesium part now.
Yes.
Magnesium will come into picture once the patient is stabilized and over a period of 7 to because the trace element, the amount is in itself is so small that if you go give more, it will be yes, sir.
I agree with you that if for primary resuscitation, I think magnesium is not that important. Later
Yes.
on, when
It will
patient
be.
goes for electrolyte disturbances, at that time, sometime this people, they advise magnesium, but that is totally
yes.
different. Initial resuscitation, you don't need to look for magnesium and all. What Lakshman
Yes.
says?
Yes, very right.
Right. I think Dr. Honklas will also have something to say about it. Dr. Honklas, Sunil bhai?
No, sir. Magnesium. I understand that calcium and potassium, also that of the phosphate. Phosphate is also important because the patient who are after resuscitation, we are starting with the nutrition therapy. So hypophosphatemia to begin with, it will again the predisposing, or it is a I can say the gold standard marker of the refeeding syndrome. So that is also, but magnesium also, I am not fully aware of whether how much magnesium would be important.
Not
Also, like
definitely not. Okay, go ahead.
also like
Okay,
to
Darshan,
ask
go
about
ahead.
the hypoalbuminemia, how much it is you feel it is important, or the low serum albumin level, especially for the nutrition therapies. So I just like
Okay.
to have a question here.
Okay.
What's it?
How much importance we will give to the serum albumin level for the diagnosis of the malnutrition?
Darshan?
Patient albumin level less than 2.5 is
Yes, serum albumin level,
less than
anything which is less than 3.5, you can consider as a hypoalbuminemia. Most of those malnourished patients, severely malnourished patients, we have seen 2.5 to 3 gram per deciliter. But for the diagnosis of the malnutrition, we should not consider the serum albumin level as a marker. Of course, for the prognosis over a period of time to check the nutrient status and to see the effectiveness of the nutritional management, we can see the serum albumin level because uh, there are a lot of impact on the capillaries, uh, especially when the patient is critically ill or having infection, which will lead to the increased capillary leak, and because of that, albumin is transferred from intravascular compartment to extravascular compartment, which will lead to the interstitial or the uh, edema if it is more the profound. So to check the serum albumin level for the diagnosis of the malnutrition is not the wiser thing to do.
It is not
Okay.
an acute marker. Basically, it is for
Yes,
chronic
yes.
malnutrition.
Right. Go ahead, Darshan.
Chronic malnutrition.
Sorry, I
Yes,
just like
sir.
to make a point over here.
Yes, sir. Sunil bhai, bolo.
No, I just made the point here.
Yes.
Okay, fine. Darshan, go ahead.
yes.
I hope things are clear, Darshan.
So,
Okay, fine.
the regarding the replacement of the fluid in case of the gastric fistula, more loss of the chloride sodium. So the half NS with 10 unit of potassium can be given as replacement. In case of the small bowel fistula, there is loss of the isotonic sodium with potassium around 15 milliequivalent per liter. So the normal saline with 10 unit of potassium can be given. In case of the colonic fistula, there sodium loss is less, but the potassium loss is more. So the RFNS with the 20 units of potassium can be given. In case of pancreatic fistula, there is more loss of bicarbonate. So the normal saline with 10 unit of potassium with bicarbonate should be given. The next one is the nutrition of the patient.
Only one thing. One minute. I just wanted to ask you that do we give normal saline with adding potassium, or do we have some other better options available? Fluids like ISO-G, ISO-M.
Yeah.
What is the specialty? When can we be giving that? Right, you don't need to add all these things. There are ready-made fluids available which can be given in the acute phase for replenishment. And you should be well aware with the contents of these specifically, and they are given the name also like this. The ISO-G is good for lot of sodium and all those things. Okay, go ahead.
Yes.
In pancreatic fistula, how will you manage for bicarbonate? Darshan.
According
How
to
much ml of the pancreatic juices which are having fistulous output, how much bicarbonate should be replaced? Is there any criteria or any calculatory thing?
according to my blood gas analysis, pH of the.
So you will get blood gas analysis if there is more than 300 of the pancreatic juices are lost daily. Otherwise, you can replace by just by giving oral fluid and bicarbonate, because saliva also contains lots of bicarbonate also. So you have to replace bicarbonate in the form of ENO. We usually give ENO to the patient, and so that will replace the bicarbonate. So more than 300 loss is there from the pancreatic juices, then it requires blood gas analysis frequently, and you have to replace bicarbonate accordingly. Okay.
Nutrition. The second main point is the nutrition of the patient. Ongoing nutritional assessment should be done, and the nutritional support is mandated. The nutritional support, which can be the enteral or parenteral, depends on the anatomy of the fistula, and it is better to give a portion of 20% of nutrition through the enteral route to maintain the mucosal barrier, enterohepatic circulation, and immunologic integrity. In case of a low output fistula, the energy requirement is around 30 to 35 kilocalories per kg per day, with 1 to 2 gram of protein per kg per day required. In case of high output fistula, it requires 1.5 to 2 times of normal kilocalories, which is around 45 to 50 kilocalories per kg per day, 1.5 to 2.5 gram per kg per day of protein. So turnover proteins like the retinol binding protein and free albumin can be measured weekly, which correlates with the morbidity and mortality of the CRP measurement can be done for the ongoing inflammatory changes. The nutritional.
Yes, yeah, you continue with this nutrition part, then I will ask, or I will give some my opinion.
Yes, please. Because before that, go back one slide. You said that low output and high output fistula, right?
Yes.
Suppose there is a low output fistula from the jejunum and high output fistula from ileum. Will it be same?
Nutritional requirements.
You say will it be same? According to this, so this is a standard thing. But remember, depend upon the site of fistula, you may have to vary it. That is, a high output fistula arising from jejunum require much more than high output fistula from ileum. Distal. As you go the distal fistula, nutritional requirement will decrease. as you go proximally, nutritional requirement will be, and as you go proximally, the electrolyte requirement and the stabilization is more important than nutrition. As you go distal, it will be nutrition which is more important. You understand? So it is not a generalized blanket that low output you to do this. Depends the site always that rider should be there, because each fistula is way of presentation. You should be very careful which site fistula you are treating. The nutritional requirement, again, the important point is that you have to clarify what will you give when it is antral and what will you give when it is parenteral.
Dr. Sunil, yeah, you want to say something, sir?
Or want to complete that part?
Yeah, after the assessment, there might be the case that patient is having pre-existing malnutrition or ongoing malnutrition during the treatment, or patient is undergoing surgery. So, of course, we start with the physiological route, that is with the enteral, and the calorie requirement. Sir said that calorie requirement, protein requirement, nutrient requirement again depend on the site, but also we have to consider the weight of the patient.
Exactly.
If the patient is obese patient, then this 30 to 35 kilocalorie, this should not be, this is too high. We should give somewhere around 20 hypocalorie, that is 20 kilocalorie per kg per day. And in this case of obesity, we should give somewhere around 2 to 2.5 gram per kg per day protein. I'm talking about the protein. Yes, that is one point. And second thing, enteral, of course, we start with the enteral. Whenever there are high output fistula, we can withhold the enteral and we can continue with the parental, either in the form of supplemental, if it is possible, or then we can start with the total parental nutrition. But again, the most important thing, what we are often miss, that is the nutritional assessment. If the patient is severely malnourished, then we can even start the parenteral nutrition in case of low output fistula, if the patient is severely malnourished. And at the same time, I don't know whether it is being done at your institution or not. We can also check the parameter like biochemical matter parameter like serum citrulline level. So serum citrulline, yeah, citrulline is a non-essential amino acid synthesized by the enterocyte, and that actually gives to some extent marker of the functionality of the GI tract. So if the serum citrulline level is less than 20 micromole per liter, then we can consider that it is a GI failure, and we can go ahead with the total parenteral nutrition. So
is it available? It is available here.
I have
Darshan, is it available
in India who are providing this test? Serum citrulline level.
Who is providing? Sorry, I did not get it.
I need to check. I will share the name of the laboratory with you.
Yeah,
so
thank you.
Definitely not routine. Lakshman, are you aware of this?
Yes. But these are more of theoretical approaches rather than practical approach.
Clinical trial I have seen, not in observational study.
Yeah, it is more of. So what I suggest, we should know what length is available for the nutritional introduction, because if you know that if you can use the gut, that is the preference over the parenteral nutrition. So aim is always to assess whether gut is available to provide nutrition or not. That is one thing. And how to assess that available gut, whether proximal gut is available, distal is available, how high output, low output, we know about that. But availability of the gut to absorb the nutrient, that is the most important thing. Hello?
And yes, we are getting it.
So how to assess?
Yeah, we are hearing, sir.
That is important part of the assessment while considering the nutrition. Nutritional assessment is one part, and introduction of nutrition supplement is the second part.
Okay.
So, hello?
Yes, please carry on.
So assessment is equally important, and introduction is rather more important. If gut is not available for nutrients to be absorbed, then the option available is just parenteral nutrition.
Okay.
And it has its own inherent complications.
So how will you know that gut is available or not? What are the parameters?
So the options available to assess the gut is, one is dye study with water soluble contrast. Suppose you give gastrographene, assess the length of the bowel. You can give orally, you can give through the fistula tract, so you can assess the downstream as well.
So I think you have taken investigation, Darshan?
Yes.
Na baki hai sir ji.
So that
Yeah, it will come ahead.
It will come later on. Okay.
Because in discussing the fistula, many things go hand in hand. We cannot just describe one by one.
Okay.
In case.
Can you show the
Darshan,
just a minute. Sunil bhai, you were saying something. I think we stopped you in between.
No, sir. Continue. If I like to add some point, I will add.
So that is the any other parameter you say for the assessment? You were saying one is this level, other thing.
No, assessment we are doing the assessment the same way that like we are doing for any hospitalized patient. But there are certain points like even as we are considering while monitoring the patient, we are checking the nitrogen balance. So here we have to modify this formula also of the nitrogen balance, because a lot of fluid is lost through entero-cutaneous fistula. So that also we need to consider, and that is why we are giving the higher protein in case of the entero-cutaneous fistula.
Okay, Darshan, continue.
Yes. For the nutritional assessment, there is the ASTM guideline, which is the insufficient energy intake, which is less than 50% for more than 5 days, or less than 75% for more than 1 month, which is the severe chronic malnutrition. Weight loss of the patient, which the dry weight is calculated according to his age and the build. Loss of the muscle mass, which can be calculated with the mid-arm circumference, and the bioelectrical impedance analysis. The loss of the subcutaneous fat, which can be assessed with the triceps skin fold or the dark circles and hollows in the orbital region with obvious depressions between the ribs and prominent iliac. Fifth is the local or generalized fluid accumulation over the around the face, abdomen, extremities, and scrotum. And sixth is the diminished functional status, which is the hand grip strength. Measured using the dynamometer. At least 2 of 6 characteristics are needed for the diagnosis of the malnutrition. If the more 2 or more characteristics are met, malnutrition can be characterized first by the severity and further by the acuity of the situation. Parenteral nutrition, which can be required in the...
Just a minute. Somebody's audio is causing problem, I think so. Whose audio is it? Can you find out and mute them? Okay, continue, Darshan.
Darshan, one thing, while we are talking about enteral nutrition, have you taken up total gut irrigation somewhere?
No, sir.
Okay, Sahib, we'll discuss it later on.
Okay.
Fine.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Apurva, if you want to word about it, I think we can discuss it right now, because then he is going on parenteral.
Yeah, that is right. So basically the idea is that we have at least Pankaj-wise 1 or 2 residents have done a study on total gut irrigation in patients with fecal fistulas, and we have found good results. So it gives 2 or 3 things very importantly. One is, by the gut irrigation itself, you can come to know about the available gut available for nutrition, as Dr. Khiria said. At the same time, it has been found to be exceptionally good and helping in terms of patient's nutrition. So once you give total gut irrigation and then you start the patient on enteral diet, we have found to have positive feedback in patients with fecal fistula. How it is done? Routinely, we give 2 liters of normal saline through the Rice tube. as a wash and allow it to pass through the bowel. Wherever the leak is, most of the time, quite a lot amount is removed through the tract, through the fistula tract. The remaining
Not
amount
getting the
goes
audio.
beyond. Hello? Hello? Sir, hello?
Apurva bhai, you are heard. You are audible.
Okay, Sahib and Apa. So I think that is clear. So the thing is, I mean, this is what we have seen. In one of the conferences also we had seen, and I think Dr. Manish, somebody had one or two times they had this dissertation, and we have done a study of quite a lot number of patients where we have found positive feedback in patients with fecal fistula after total gut irrigation.
This gut irrigation is usually done in a acute phase of the fistula,
Yes, acute.
not in
Yes.
a chronic fistula.
So before we start enter nutrition in acute phase.
So it has to. I think you have discussed what are the advantages.
ना साहब साहब एक तो audio ना था तो.
Partially.
No, now I'm getting it.
The point is that one thing is very clear: the total gut irrigation, when it is given, you can understand the fistula is complete or incomplete. If so, you can calculate the amount, that how much is coming from fistula and how the patient is passing to the stool, and that can give you the amount of the absorption getting place. We'll give you rough idea about the availability of enteral root. That's what we were talking about, availability of enteral root. So apart from gastrographic studies, CT scan, sometimes enema, sometimes fistulogram, you can exactly decide the length. This will also help. One. Second, sometimes small obstruction is there, it can be cleared. That's what say. Third advantage, this has been documented, is the giving a repeated gut irrigation makes the proximal to fistula gut more prone to having a more absorption. They say it causes the villus hypertrophy. There are reports of that also. So people are doing, and we always advise a gut irrigation, total gut irrigation in case of entero-cutaneous fistula, particularly to see whether this fistula is complete or incomplete. It gives you the idea. Okay.
Darshan, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Parenteral nutrition may be required in the patients with the proximal small bowel, proximal jejunum, a gastric or duodenal AC fistula, a high output fistula. In the initial period of onset of AC fistula, the fistula output may be very high. So the initial discontinuation of oral intake is recommended. They may help because the oral intake stimulates the further loss of fluids, electrolytes, and protein via the fistula. Patients with the persistent paralytic ileus and not well established fistula tract may benefit more with the parenteral nutrition. A decrease in fistula output frequently occurs with the initiation of the total parenteral nutrition. Enteral nutrition, which can be started when the fistula, there is a distal entero-cutaneous fistula, which can be started a junction to the parenteral nutrition. Around 20% of the enteral nutrition given with parenteral nutrition provides maintains the mucosal barrier and preserves the hepatic and immunologic function of the gut. And nutrition can be given when there is more than 4 feet of gut available distal to the fistula by the fistuloclysis or the feeding jejunostomy. Next one is the control of the sepsis. The aggressive
Nothing about
management. Yes.
Nothing about NJ tubing.
Proximal, sir.
You have said something about pancreatic fistula. You have said okay, fine. You said something about pancreatic fistula. That's why I pointed out that feeding NJ tube is also good when you are thinking of because you have taken up pancreatic fistula also. That's why.
Yes. The third step is the control of the sepsis, aggressive management of the ongoing infection, and the careful surveillance for the new septic foci are the necessary. Usually, the fever tachycardia and leukocytosis are the predictor of the sepsis. Local control around the fistula wound is extremely important, and it is important to prevent the skin excoriation by providing the adequate fistula drainage. There should be radiological investigation done to find out the intra-abdominal abscess or search of the peritonitis in case of a severe septic patient, and there may be radiologically percutaneous drain may be placed in a patient having the localized intra-abdominal abscess.
No. Go back. What do you mean by radiological investigation?
CT or ultrasound, sir.
Darshan, understand this is not a non-specific thing. Or this, it should be very clear. What investigation, if you do, it is a proximal fistula, high fistula, low fistula. What investigation you will do when it is a chronic fistula? Radiological investigation means in all patients you will do CT, all patients you will do USG or any other investigation.
No,
it purely depends upon the site of fistula. So you do only for an abscess. What do you mean by search of peritonitis?
In case of patient having fever, tachycardia, and leukocytosis,
Sorry. Radiological investigation to find and search of peritonitis. How will you do search of peritonitis?
I think he is mentioning this sepsis only. That is why he is mistaken. But Darshan, you should first do some investigation to find out the fistula and level of fistula.
So he has investigation part. I think he has not taken.
Yes. Which investigation pathway you will follow?
First fistulogram can be done.
First you will do fistulogram.
First fistulogram. See, this kind of headings will not work, Darshan. And radiological investigation means what? That is also not clear.
And this is not fistula in nano, it's a fecal fistula. How can you do a fistulogram just like that?
Yes, you cannot.
And what would, and what amount of dye you would need for that? Have you ever thought about it?
What you are describing here is about enteral feeding or something else? No. This control of sepsis comes in where? It comes in enteral feeding or parenteral? Because your heading is control of sepsis.
It is.
Which was your previous slide? Yes, enteral nutrition. So enteral nutrition में control of sepsis मार्ग है?
Yes, coach. I am also confused.
No, sir. Stabilization.
I think he is trying to stabilize the patient by control of any kind of infection in a post-op laparotomy patient. Darshan, am I correct?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, any wound infection or any. It is a part of stabilization.
Control drainage. I think this is he is describing in stabilization portion.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So if you feel that there is some kind of peritonitis, you will go for a USG or for any collection, or you may go for a CT if at all required.
Yes, that should be more precise.
Because I will choose ultrasonography.
Ultrasonography is more handy and cheaper, and it will serve the purpose.
Yes, better for when you are looking for collections.
Yes.
And it should always be sonography guided drainage. That also you should mention.
Percutaneous drainage you have mentioned, but you should write sonography. Okay. What is, okay, proceed next.
Next.
Fistula drainage
Yes,
in skin, the surroundings.
Fistula drainage and skin
Surrounding,
care. Yes.
surrounding skin can be protected with the zinc oxide, aluminum paste, or
No,
stoma adhesive.
it is not can be, it must be protected.
That is probably one of the most important feature,
Most
especially
important,
when you
most
are
important.
planning a surgery.
You should remember, I am telling you in the round again and again, there should not be a leak of one drop on the skin. So it should be protected, must.
Yes.
Okay.
Negative pressure wound therapy, which is the works well to control the drainage and protect the skin. The wake apparatus minimizes the size of the abdominal wound and simplifies the management by decreasing the frequency of dressing and may promote the healing of fistula.
Darshan, this is a very controversial statement you have put, basically because if you are trying to get a healing out of it, applying a wet would absolutely not allow the wound to heal. If there are, if at all you have 5% chances of the fecal fistula to heal naturally if the patient is passing stool, it will be completely demolished if you apply wax. And this has been told categorically by the people who supply and support wax. In fact, I have made a mistake when I had applied something like this in a patient healing after colonic anastomosis, and he had developed a small leak. So I had a very in-depth talking with those people.
5% chances of another fistula development with.
Yeah, so I think, sir, what do you say?
About what?
Application of WAC, because WAC will not allow the wound to heal at all.
WAC is the
Darshan,
last thing, I think, and
Darshan,
it should be.
do you have any evidence to say use of WAC? Like do you have any paper or anything that you have based this suggestion out of?
Yes.
So in case of a large wound over abdomen and there is a entero-atmospheric type of fistula, the application of WAC is indicated. And when
Do you have any evidence? That is what Ravi is asking.
So
yes,
have you read in any paper, in any book?
Yes.
Do you have
Yes,
something of that, sir?
Then,
You have.
I have
then you
taken
come
it from
up with
the
the
books.
reference.
Okay, so please quote that reference.
Yes.
Fisher's textbook of mastery. I have taken this.
So okay. So then in that case, what Apurva sir is saying is very correct, that the same force that is going to evacuate the abdominal cavity is the same force which will not allow those two margins to even fall together so that they can heal, right? Now what you have to say is, if you have said about the use of WAC, then you have to categorically mention if there are any specific indications to use of it rather than a blanket thing like use of WAC. So do you have anything like that?
Yes, in case of large abdominal wounds like this, and when there is multiple fistulas, yeah, the WAC can be applied, and there is a 5% chance of fistula development, new fistula development in this.
So,
So now Darshan, you are giving a clear-cut condition in which after operation, wound has just given some dehiscence, and there are multiple fistulas opening, or granulation tissue or intestinal loops lying open on the wound. That is what you want to say?
No, sir. There should be presence of some large amount of granulation tissue around the fistula opening.
Yes.
And then we can apply
So
the
then and only in those cases you can have some special kind of application of vacuum assisted therapy which can be applied in this kind of very, very selective cases. That is not our point of concern. I think what is,
But sir,
yes,
one
see that
more point.
afterwards.
Darshan himself said that study said that there is a 5 to 10% chances this patient may develop more fistulas because of the application.
Yes.
If I'm
So that is a different problem, very selective, and someone has done that study. Before that, I go to your previous slide. I think we will discuss.
Rather, sir,
slide.
what we use.
Yes.
In our department, we have been using Fistula Care Manager. It is available from the hospital itself, and they are excellent. Yeah, it is excellent, sir.
Darshan, I would have been happy if you have mentioned that. Anyway, no problem. This is also a good knowledge provider. But what is our concern about this management is the fistula drainage and skin care. You have mentioned in first two bulleted points that surrounding skin should be protected and negative pressure therapy works well. So both these points are not applicable everywhere. That is my point. Negative pressure therapy does not work everywhere, and there are only few this type of studies and this type of evidences. What is applicable to most of the patient is
fistula drainage bags, fistula manager.
Yes, manager, yes.
Fistula manager and stoma adhesive fistula bags. Stoma adhesive fistula bags, which will not allow any leakage outside that stoma adhesive bag, so that skin excoriation can develop. And if at all there is a leak, it will protect the skin. Okay.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Pharmacological support for the fistula effluent management. The proton pump inhibitor and or histamine blockers can be given in patient with the
Just a minute. Darshan, what do you mean by effluent management? I really do not know. That's why I'm asking.
So fistula output.
Okay.
Output. In case of proximal fistula, duodenal gastric fistula.
Okay.
Or proximal jejunal fistula.
So what do you want actually? What is your target or the aim in this pharmacological management?
To reduce the output, fistula output.
So it is a pharmacological way of reducing the effluent which is coming out through fistula's opening, right?
Yes.
So what are those things?
So first one is the proton pump inhibitor or the histamine blockers, which will reduce the gastric acid secretion and lead to the reduction in the output. The second is the somatostatin and its analogs like octreotide. But the studies show that somatostatin is more efficacious, and the trial of octreotide or somatostatin should be given to up to the 48 hours only. If the reduction in the output does not occur, it should not be continued. The trials have shown that this leads to the decrease in the time of fistula closure using the somatostatin analog. The antiperistaltic agent like loperamide can also be used before the intake of food. Or in case of Crohn's disease, active Crohn's disease, the cyclosporin or infliximab can be tried. Infliximab particularly have shown the reduction in increase in the closure rate of the Crohn's fistula and decrease the time for fistula.
Last point is to give treatment to the basic pathology. Whatever, for example, it's a Crohn's disease, you need to keep that under control. May it be this tablet or it may be some other suppression. That is important. Sir, anything about antiperistaltic? Actually, we want the patient to pass stool.
So I am going to ask Darshan about specific indications for each and every bulleted points he has mentioned. when do you give PPI or H2 blocker? When do you give somatostatin analogs? When do you give loperamide? And in which many pathologies you give targeted pharmacotherapy?
So PPIs and histamine blockers
In all
are
cases, suppose
proximal
patient has a colonic fistula, then
colonic. It is not
what is
useful
the role of PPI and H2 blocker in colonic fistula or most distal ileal fistulas?
So in most distal ileal fistulas, agent like loperamide can be
So
used,
you should,
but in
Darshan,
proximal fistulas,
you should mention and talk and discuss things like a postgraduate candidate. These are the headings okay for the undergraduates and for mention in the theories. But PPI and H2 blockers has role only in
proximal fistulas, gastric
proximal fistulas, and somatostatin analog also has
in proximal jejunal fistulas, so proximal fistula only.
or pancreatic.
Yes, pancreatic fistulas.
And as Apurva has rightly pointed out, we most of the time we do not use loperamide.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And there are so many other pharmacotherapy we give for so many types of pathology like tuberculosis, malignancy, sepsis, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, right? So pharmacotherapy or definitive therapy for the fistula which are due to secondary to some pathology. Okay. Go ahead.
In the entero-cutaneous fistula patients, first blood investigations to be sent, which is the complete blood count, and patient's renal function test, liver function test, and the next investigations are the fistulogram of the fistula, which can be done with the dye, and a gastrographin study can also be done. The next investigation is CT or ultrasound.
Darshan,
Yes, sir.
again, I would like to interrupt. See, when you use the word fistulogram, that means you will be injecting the dye through the abdomen, right? Or through, or it is oral.
Through the abdomen.
How do you plan to do it? So, do you see what is the problem, especially when you are going it? See, the point is, when you inject, bowel is long bowel, right? So if you inject the dye from the fistula from the abdomen, you are not going to find anything in the abdomen. How will you come to know which part of the gut the dye is going? Is there any way of knowing whether you are going in which direction, proximal or distal, or which part of the bowel? Is it possible to know exactly? We can make an approximation, but we cannot make a exact localization. If you give a oral dye, see, if you can give a oral dye and then do a CT, then you will come to follow the dye from the esophagus to stomach to duodenum and the small bowel. So we'll know exactly where the leak is and how is the passage of the dye in the abdomen. In the bowel. So that will give you a better idea. Doing a fistulogram probably, see, if it's an enterocolic fistula, abdominocolic fistula, you may come to know that, yeah, it is going in the colon. Which part of the colon, it becomes very difficult. But when you talk about any small bowel fistula, I think oral contrast would be a better approach rather than going a simple fistulogram.
Yes, sir.
Because you will never know which way it is going. The bowel is very long.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Can be done with to recognize the any intra-abdominal abscess, distal obstruction to the fistula side, and the anatomy of the fistula and the fistula tract. Endoscopy can be tried in case of
you are saying CT or USG. So which one you prefer and how you proceed? Because you have sonography, which is very handy and uh, cheap and non-invasive. So when you go for sonography, how does it help? What are the limitations? And when sonography is not helping, when and why you do CT scan?
So sonography can
You have to give the examples.
sonography can identify the abdominal collection, but it cannot delineate the fistula anatomy well, and it can also not.
So you have done fistulogram. See, to delineate the anatomy, to delineate the morphology, to delineate where from it is originating, what is the status of distal bowel, you have done fistulogram. No, fistulogram, generally you inject some contrast material from the openings which are available. So most of the things you know, and most of the time, if your patient is if he is belong to your own operative room, then you know the pathology, and then you know the most probable cause. Only in those cases which are coming from outside, you don't know anything about intra-abdominal pathology, it is yes. Otherwise, in your own patients, whether it is duodenal blowout or jejunal or ileal fistula or colonic fistula, most of the time you know the etiology and you know the distal status of the distal bowel. So to delineate the anatomy of fistula, you do CT scan or sonography?
Sir, as a
Hello.
yeah, yes,
Yes,
sir.
yes. Answer. Darshan,
Yes, sir.
I am not getting the audio.
Yes.
Yes,
Sir,
Darshan,
as a
answer.
pre-operative, sir, as a pre-operative decision taking.
Yes. See, just to recognize intra-abdominal abscess, sonography and CT scan would definitely help you. But to rule out distal obstruction uh, and anatomy, you have to do some contrast study. Okay. Now endoscopy, which endoscopy you are planning to do?
In case of a spontaneous fistula or secondary fistula, to find out the cause, like in malignancy or Crohn's disease, in which cases with endoscopy we can take the biopsy and find out the pathology of the fistula.
Malignancy and Crohn's. You are talking about enterocutaneous fistula, huh, Darshan? In both of these cases, most of the time it is internal fistula.
Yes.
We are concerned with the enterocutaneous.
Yes, sir. For that indication only the endoscopy could be done, sir.
Where endoscopy is helpful actually.
In case of
it is diagnostic or therapeutic also. Have you heard about some therapeutic which is done by endoscopy in case of fistulae?
In case of, sir, internal fistula, there can be done, but not in case of the entero-cutaneous fistulas.
Nowadays, even in mature fistulous tracts arising from esophagus, stomach, and duodenum, people are doing plug therapy and this
Fibrin glue gel forms.
glue therapy. So by endoscopy, it will be diagnostic as well as therapeutic.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
decision making. It depends on the anatomic location, like the favorable anatomy in the patient, unfavorable anatomy in the gastric and ileal regions, and favorable anatomy in the esophagus, stomach, duodenum, especially in case of the duodenum stump location is more favorable for the spontaneous closure. And the nutrition status of the patient. In the well-nourished patients, the fistula closure, spontaneous fistula closure is likely. Then the malnourished patient. Presence of sepsis prevents the spontaneous closure of the fistula. And the etiology of the fistula. In case of the secondary to diverticulitis and the postoperative fistula, iatrogenic fistula closes spontaneously. And in case of the Crohn's disease or malignancy, until the underlying cause is removed, the fistula does not close. Of the bowel surrounding the fistula. If the condition of bowel surrounding the fistula is healthy, the closer spontaneous closure chances are high rather than in case of the pathology of the bowel like Crohn's disease, etc. Fistula tract, thin fistula, thin long fistula tract, usually more than 2 centimeters, favors the spontaneous closure. Then the wide narrow fistula tract. The next one is the fistula's opening. More than 1 meter square opening unfavors the spontaneous closure. Less than 1 meter square opening favors the fistula's closure. Patient condition and the state of the abdomen. If the patient is vitally unstable and abdomen is rigid, we should not plan for the operative management. Rather than we should stabilize the patient and let the intra-abdominal inflammatory process settle down to plan for the operative intervention. Like I said, the anatomical.
Darshan, sorry to interrupt you.
Okay, these points I think you have discussed. Next slide.
One slide back, please.
Yes.
Yeah. Any nutritional parameters or biochemical tests you would like to do to check the spontaneous closure?
Serum transferrin levels, serum transferrin, serum albumin.
Yes. So it is more than 3 serum albumin and transferrin more than 140 milligrams. Then
200, more than 200.
Yeah, and how you will, we know that you discussed earlier about the enteral nutrition and when parenteral nutrition is indicated. When you take a decision of discontinuation of the parenteral nutrition or tapering down of the parenteral nutrition and that of the taper of the enteral nutrition.
More than 60% of the daily requirement can be taken with enteral feeding. We should taper down the parenteral nutrition.
Actually, I was hoping that we will discuss about the formula of the enteral and parenteral nutrition. So any specific you like to comment upon the glutamine or the any other immune nutrient? Because enteral nutrition we use mainly the polymeric formula. Any specific about oral, because glutamine, I'll not ask the question, I'll just make a point here. Oral glutamine is recommended even in the recent guidelines of the ICU by the ASPN bodies, that oral glutamine you can give to 10 to 15 days for the wound healing. And fish oil content, whenever there is a parenteral nutrition, fish oil containing lipid emulsion, if we use, that will be more useful for the improving of the nutritional status, especially for the improving the muscle gain and the body weight of that patient. So these are the formula we can opt while doing the enteral or parenteral nutrition.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Please continue.
Definitive therapy. Around 30 to 80% of the fistulas closes.
Darshan, hold on a second. See, we are going up to definitive therapy, but a valid question was asked by Dr. Sunil. I mean, See, the thing is, how do you calculate how much amount of fluid and nutrition you need to give to the patient? Especially such patients are in, especially those patients who are in sepsis, they have a very high catabolic stage, very high catabolic stage. So the energy requirement is much very high. Can you throw some light on the amount of energy you need to provide, specifically beforehand, afterhand, or just before the going for any kind of surgery? Or Dr. Sunil will put some few points later on.
So there is
Let Darshan answer.
Yeah, Darshan, yes.
Sir, there is a Harris-Benedict equation regarding the basal energy expenditure requirement of the patient, and which is by this formula 66.5 plus 13.5 into weight of the patient plus 5 into the height of the patient minus say 6.7 into the age of the patient. We can identify the kilocalorie requirement of the patient, and we can multiply it accordingly with the stress factor. Like in case of low output fistula, the stress factor is 1.1. Moderate output fistula stress factor is 1.2, and in high output fistula the stress factor is 1.5. And we can multiply the given calorie into, by 1.5 and get the requirement for the hypermetabolic states.
Perfect. And what about the total amount of fluid you need to give the patient? See, there are two things.
We can
rather three things. One is the energy portion, one is the electrolyte portion, and one is the fluid portion.
So electrolyte, sir, 1 to 2 milli equivalent per liter of sodium potassium can be given, and calcium magnesium can be given into 15 to 20 milli equivalent, and the fluid requirement is 30 to 40 ml per kg per day, sir.
Okay, whether it is 200 ml or 500 ml or 1500 ml per day, the output. Sorry.
So we can modify it accordingly the input-output charting, but the urine output should be maintained above the 0.5
at 5
ml
yes,
per
0.5
kg
to 1 ml. Yes, perfect, perfect. Okay, okay, go ahead.
Yes. Definitive therapy. The spontaneous closure occurs in 30 to 80% of the patient. Regarding the small bowel intestinal fistula, about 90% closure occurs within 4 to 6 weeks. If beyond 6 weeks, remaining patient develop closure at 2 months, and remaining patient need the definitive therapy for the closure.
See, you said that more than 60% patients they heal by itself. That is a very good thing. Secondly, you said is 30 to 80%. And secondly, you said is that beyond two months time, it is less likely to heal. So can you tell me what are the features that would point you towards the fact that probably these fistulas are likely to heal and some fistulas are not likely to heal? आपने पहला भी बात की थी, Dr. Khiria had also pointed out something.
So there is a favorable or unfavorable points, like in anatomical location. If oropharyngeal, esophageal fistula, duodenal stump fistula are there, more than lateral duodenal fistula, they are likely to heal. There may be tract length more than 2 centimeters, thin tract is likely to heal. When the defect, fistula defect size is less than 1 centimeter square, it is likely to heal. And when there is low output, the surrounding bowel is healthy, or etiology is like diverticulitis, postoperative iatrogenic fistula, appendicitis, these kind of fistula are more likely to. And the adjoining factor are the nutritional status of the patient or the presence or absence of the sepsis.
Good, go ahead.
For the repair, it requires the fistula repair with the complex abdominal wall closure in case of the open abdomen. Usually, in case of the operative management. The entry should be gained through the origin site in the abdomen, preferably, to reduce the tackling of the adhesion and adhesion to the previous operated site. And the carefully adhesive lysis should be done, usually starting from the distal towards the fistula site to reduce the injury to the distal bowel attached to the fistula site. And we should rule out the distal obstruction to the fistula site. And
you are Darshan, you are describing on table management.
Yes.
Hmm?
Yes, sir.
Right. So you say at least that you should do adhesinolysis in a way that distal obstruction is ruled out, right? Actually, it should have been done before operation or pre-operatively, but on table at least you ensure that there is no distal adhesion or distal obstruction. Okay.
Yes. And for the fistula repair, the resection and anastomosis of the bowel should be done. And for gastrostomy or feeding jejunostomy could be done in proximal fistula, or to defunctionalize to fistula with a gastrostomy tube.
Defunctionalize. See, when you put a gastrostomy tube, how high will be the fistula? See, the thing is, unless your feeding comes from distal to the fistula, it is not going to help. You understand?
Sir,
For example, if you are having a jejunal fistula, and while resection you feel that the jejunum, the opening is quite higher up, what you can go is you can go make a feeding jejunostomy distal to the fistula, so that your anastomosis is protected by keeping the patient nil orally, and at the same time feeding the patient through the feeding jejunostomy, so that his enteral and all energy requirements are fulfilled. If you are going to do a gastrostomy in a patient with a jejunal anastomosis, it's of no use.
For drainage purposes.
Why do you want a drainage purpose?
Gastrostomy.
Yes, they also just mentioned that to prevent the prolonged NG tube placement.
No, Darshan, don't just mention it like this. Apurva has clearly said that when you have done resection anastomosis, to give rest to the part, and to start enteral feeding at a time, you can do distal feeding jejunostomy. There is no point in doing gastrostomy.
Yes.
Darshan,
okay.
Are you talking about decompression of stomach through gastrostomy? Is that what you want to say?
Fistula, yes. In case of
yes. So what I'm saying is, even if the fistula is distal somewhere in proximal jejunum, when you say to put a gastrostomy, is it in order to decompress stomach? Is that what is your suggestion?
Yes, sir. For
decompression of the stomach. Now, when you can decompress through NG tube, then what would be the indication of decompressing with a gastrostomy? So, do you have any literature to quote this, where you can quote this from? Did you understand my question? If the gastric decompression is the sole purpose, then why can we not just put NG tube? Hello.
Hello.
Say.
Prolonged NG tube placement will lead.
Are you there?
Complications like distal esophageal stricture, sinus. Yes, sir.
Yeah, but Darshan, when you want to say something like this, you need a robust literary, sort of base. So, is there any article or maybe is there any book reference that you are quoting this from?
Ravi, he cannot take the hint. I think you answer.
Okay. Okay. Continue, I think.
No, but okay, we'll continue. So basically, I feel that a NJ tube or a rice tube should be good enough for drainage of the proximal bowel. When the anastomosis is quite proximal, you can put a feeding tube beyond the anastomosis, or if it is very distal, you can make a ileostomy out of it. See, what you want is to keep the integrity of the anastomosis intact till it heals. So for that thing, if it is very proximal, you can put a feeding beyond it, or if it is very distal, you can put a ileostomy before it. That will keep your anastomosis safe. You get my point, Darshan? Okay.
Yes, sir.
So go ahead. What is this? Okay, management of abdominal wall.
In case of open abdomen with fistula, if there is no facial defect, preoperative facial defect, primary closure should be done with without any facial relaxation. If there is preoperative less than 5 centimeter of small defect, primary closure can be done with or without some facial relaxation. And if a more than 5 centimeter of defect is present, component separation technique can be, or it may be combined with the prosthetic material, or the coverage can be done with the vascularized myocutaneous flap, which is latissimus dorsiflap, or use of prosthetic material like biological and non-biological, absorbable,
Darshan?
non-absorbable. Hello? Yes.
Sorry, I'm not interrupting, but I think you are really playing with fire today, yaar. Ravi, what do you say? I mean, he is putting a feeding J for decompression and then using a mesh for closure in a patient of fecal fistula. I mean, of course, there are people who do it, but just completing the list.
I think somewhere what he wants to say is that if it is a elective closure, means after maybe after maybe couple of months the patient has been stabilized, and now we know that now the patient needs surgery. At that time, it is almost a clean patient. So, so number one is that it is clean patient. Yeah, see, I'm not saying that what he's saying is correct or anything. We appreciate that prosthetic material we usually don't push. But
yeah, his idea is actually the point is that when you open the bowel, I think it is difficult to put a prosthetic material. I say difficult, not impossible. But I say difficult.
Yeah, but I think he has quoted it from some place. So as a part of theory or completion of a topic, at least
we'll put it.
For namesake, we need to put it.
Agreed. Okay, Darshan, go ahead.
Next.
The fifth phase is the healing or post-surgery phase. There is a early post-operative recovery. We should try to establish the oral enteral route of nutrition. The target is around more than 1500 kilocalorie per day. If this need cannot be made within 3 to 7 days, parenteral supplementation should be given until the oral nutrition up to more than 1500 kilocalorie per day could be given. And the last and most important point is the rehabilitation of the patient. Because of the large wound and chronic hospital stay, the patient is emotionally and psychologically deprived and needs the support to rehabilitate the patient into the daily lifestyle of the patient.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
કેટલી સ્લાઇડ બાકી હવે?
No. બાકી છે કે હજી કઈ? Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. આપણે અહીંયા જ છે, કાંઈ ઉતાવળ નથી.
So recurrence, post-operative recurrence of the fistula is around 50 to 34%. If exploration is done within the 12-week of the fistula, the recurrence is around 28%. If the exploration is done after the 12-week, the recurrence rate is much lower, is around 15%.
Is this recurrence related to anything else also, or only time period?
General, in general.
In general, sir, time period.
Okay. Okay, nothing else. Okay.
Okay.
Mortality after the surgical exploration, if done less than 6 weeks from the fistula formation, around 20%. If done more than 6 weeks from the fistula formation, it is around the 10%, which is half of the work. And so the fistula repair should be done ideally around 4 months to 12 months, and maximally recommended period average is 6 months. This is I have taken this from the 6 to 8 institute study combined. I have published this data. Morbidity and mortality following the entero-cutaneous fistula. Morbidity is exceedingly high, up to 90%, with in the form of the skin excoriation, dehydration, sepsis, and non-closure of the fistula. And mortality is 5 to 20%. The main cause is underlying infection and sepsis. Fistula location. In case of proximal fistula, the mortality is more. Like in case of jejunal fistula, 29%, gastric and duodenal fistula, 35%, and colonic fistula, lowest mortality, which is around 6%. If the fistula output, high output leads to mortality around 50%, with 26% in the low output fistulas. Serum albumin level of less than 2.5% predicts mortality around 40% in case of fistula patient.
Okay. Okay. Sunil bhai? Dr. Sunil?
Yes, sir.
Will you be able to throw some light on parenteral nutrition? I mean, because I know that your laptop is probably out of order because of lack of electricity. Will you be able to throw some light on especially the parenteral part of nutrition in patients of fecal fistula, specifically for our postgraduates? See, we see such patients in and out. Many patients specifically with quite higher up fistula, say jejunum or early ileum, with an output of around 600 to 800 ml. We do try to manage the patient conservatively, but at times it becomes difficult, especially when it comes to TPN.
Yes. So I will just, for the sake of PG student, I will just enlighten the students on the management part of nutritional management part of this entero-cutaneous fistula. This is based on this recent guidelines of American Society of Parenteral Enteral Nutrition, published in year 2017, that at the time of admission or just before the surgery, we can do the screening and assessment of this patient, especially for the output.
You continue, I'll take the lead.
Yes, sir. Sir, he is from Fabius Kabi, and he is a MD pharmacologist and senior management in parenteral and enteral nutrition.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Yeah, I'll continue. Thank you, Sunil bhai. Continue.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
So, especially assessment part, the assessment part is the most important, because when you are doing the assessment, now the assessment especially related with the entero-cutaneous fistula, there are no different tools are available like we can do for the liver illness. These are the general assessment tools like subjective global assessment or the NRS tool. These are the most commonly or validated tools for the assessing the malnutrition. So this which can use, but most importantly, emphasis should be on the nitrogen balance, as I mentioned earlier, because in case of entero-cutaneous fistula, there is a lot of fluid loss, and because of which we have to modify this formula. We have to consider extra protein supplementation for this patient, either it is enteral or parenteral nutrition. So after the assessment, if the patient is severely malnourished, like if I am doing the subjective global assessment, because of pre-existing malnutrition or because of the iatrogenic malnutrition, you can say, due to due course of the treatment in the hospital, if patient is like in the category C, grade C, by the subjective global assessment, then it is wiser to start the parenteral nutrition early, or we can lower down the threshold of initiation of the parenteral nutrition, because of which we can avoid the unnecessary calorie protein gap or deficit, increase the gap deficit, because as this deficit of calorie and protein is increasing, which is cumulative, day by day it is getting added. If it is more and more, there is an increased chances of mortality in this patient. So this is about the assessment part. After the assessment, coming to the choice of the route. So of course we have to calculate before that the how much calorie protein need to be given. Uh, uh, Darshan very well explain about the Harris-Benedict equation, but Harris-Benedict equation is not so practical. So either we can, there are so many apps are nowadays available, or we can do the indirect calorimetry, but very few center in India is available with indirect calorimetry, or we can go by the pragmatic approach, somewhere around 30 to 40 kilocalorie per kg per day for this patient if patient is not in the obese category, and uh, around 1.2 to 2 grams of proteins per kg per day, which we can give. Of course, when patient is on parenteral nutrition, we require additional electrolyte depend on the monitoring of the patient. The trace element need to be given, but that is for the total parenteral nutrition. But for the supplemental parenteral nutrition, of course, there is no need of giving additional electrolytes or the trace element because they are getting into their enteral nutrition. Now, choice of the route, of course, we should go ahead with the enteral nutrition first. Enteral nutrition, or we can do the fistulolysis also. That can be also a choice. Parental nutrition to be chosen only if the prognosis worse and that warrants the early need of parental nutrition, or if the entero-cutaneous fistula output is more than 500 ml, as Darshan rightly said. In that category, we can opt for the parental nutrition, either in the form of supplemental or total parental nutrition. But even though patient is on total parental nutrition, we should not forget of giving the trickle, you can say trickle feed, because trickle feed is not there for the nutritional fulfillment, but it is there to avoid any complication which is arising in case of the parenteral nutrition by not using the gut. So for the gut, because of feeding, we should give the trickle feeding. And I would always emphasizing, whenever the patient is on total parenteral nutrition, every 2 or 3 days after that, we should uh, check whether the enteral nutrition is possible or not. This is how we can encourage for the enteral nutrition, and we can step up the enteral nutrition in this patient. About the any special formulas to be used for the enteral nutrition, polymeric is always better. There is no added advantage in terms of the improving the morbidity or the decreasing the mortality rate in case if we are comparing polymeric to that of the elemental or supplemental. So polymeric is cheaper formula. If you are using the commercial formula, go ahead with the polymeric diet. Then with the uh, special substrate like glutamine or arginine you can use to improve the wound healing and for the better wound closure. For the parental nutrition, always better go ahead with the multi-chamber bag because that will reduce the risk of infection. Also, it has the ergonomic effect. And you know the advantage of the dual energy, that is the added lipid immersion. So when you're using the lipid immersion, always go with the fish oil containing lipid immersion because that will also help in benefiting the patient in terms of the reducing the inflammation. So infectious complication will be less, as well as the patient will have the better calorie control in case of the fish oil containing lipid immersion. Also, the patient nutritional build-up will be better. Muscle building or the preservation of loss of lean body mass, that will be better in case of the fish oil containing lipid immersion. So this is about the formula. Home parental nutrition, I would say, it is a good option, but it is not very well practiced in India. But we can also opt for home parental nutrition. But the indication is that patient should be medically stable. the vitals should be stable, and the patient, if the patient is having the fluid loss more than 500 ml, then you can go ahead with the home parenteral nutrition, but it has its own separate management you have to do with that, and extra care you need for that. Otherwise, early discharge patient on the patient, putting the patient for the home parenteral nutrition, and which is for somewhere around 4 to 6 weeks, and then after you can again reassess the patient, and you can step up the enteral nutrition if the patient is managing well with the enteral feeding. So that is from my end. Any question particularly related to nutrition? Maybe
one particular question I would like to ask is, what are the fluids that cannot be given by peripheral line and you need a central line for this?
Yes. So when you are giving the parenteral nutrition, the osmolarity plays a role, whether you have to go ahead with the central axis or peripheral axis. So if the osmolarity is more than that of the 3 times of the blood osmolarity, somewhere around 850 to 900, if the osmolarity is there of that of the fluid, then you can go ahead with the you should go ahead with the central route. But if it less than that, you can also choose the peripheral route. But if the central line is in place, then better to go ahead with the whether it is low osmolar or high osmolar, go ahead with the central line.
Okay. Anybody wants to ask any questions specifically to parenteral nutrition?
Unfortunately, actually, I have made a table of the whatever so far the nutritional studies are available. But I checked that the recent publication is of 2014, which have compiled the many studies. It is not the meta-analysis, but it just compiled the many studies. There is no prospective control studies for the nutrition therapy, especially with the parenteral nutrition. Most of the studies are either observational study or the retrospective studies are available. So that is why there is no very solid evidence in terms of the enteral or parenteral nutrition for the entero-cutaneous fistula. But whatever the theory and whatever the surgical practice has taught us, or the experts' opinion based on these guidelines are based.
Okay. If you possible, I have shared my email ID to you. If possible, you can just mail it to me. I'll give it in our group of students, sir.
Yes. I will share the guidelines as well as a couple of my slides.
Okay. Ravi?
No, sir, no further question. It is just that he has very nicely compiled, Dr. Sunil has very nicely compiled all the critical points of nutrition, because nutrition is a chapter and a whole topic within itself. So I think that was great. And as you rightly said that, those compilations can immensely help our students. So if they can get hold of those things, because these things they usually tend to forget in larger scheme of things of other.
Yeah. I mean, if it is, even as a teacher, I would say that this, I would rather blame it to the students than carry it on my shoulders, because it really requires delicate knowledge of those terms for keeping a patient alive for more than 15-20 days when the output is more than a liter per day. Anyway, saying that, I think we should conclude. I would thank specifically Dr. Sunil from previous CAPI for having with us, and Dr. Lakshman Khiria. We'll be meeting again on the Zoom meeting on Sunday for solitary thyroid nodule for all the students.
Okay, great.
Right, sir? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sunil. Thank you.
Thank you,
Sunil.
Thank you, Dr. Darshan.